It's time for the Daly Planet podcast show. So sit back, relax, and give us a go. Scott and Matt and maybe a guest have undertaken an epic pod quest. We're gonna ramble on about movies and books and television and directors and film festivals and this really long list of stuff that I know nothing about, but they gave it to me and they really wanted me to read through it. And that's all I can really say about it, but it's gonna be great. Okay, start the show.
Hello and welcome to the Daly Planet podcast, your weekly podcast for all things movies, TV, books, and anything else we feel like talking about. My name is Scott Daly, and I'm your host, and I'm joined for the first time in a while by Matt Freeman. Matt, it's been a minute. Welcome back to the Daly Planet proper.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I've feel like I haven't taken a break at all because obviously we've been doing podcasts nonstop for the last many months. But yes, it's our normal recurring feature where we talk about whatever's going on in the world and some specific thing that we just have to get off our chests.
Yeah, and this week's thing that we have to get off our chest is the Adventure Zone podcast. If you've never heard of this podcast before, that's okay. We're going to talk about it very generally without spoilers, and we will get into spoilers at the end of it. But if you've never listened to it before, I think you're still going to get something out of this. And hopefully by the end of it, we've convinced you to give it a shot because we both absolutely adore this podcast and what it does for storytelling and the medium of podcasting.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize up front, like normally I'm not somebody who cares a lot about spoilers outside of our We've Got Worm project, where it's sort of an important reason why we care about spoilers. But like I don't generally tend to think that spoilers diminish the enjoyment of art. But this Adventure Zone podcast, it has some of the greatest revelatory moments of any media I've ever encountered, and it really would be a shame if those were spoiled. So like I'm, even as someone who doesn't generally care about spoilers, I'm sort of wanting to really emphasize that I really love this thing, and I would much prefer that you check it out without spoilers, listeners.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head there. That there's like whenever I'm listening to a podcast and they get to a spoiler section for something I haven't seen yet, I'm usually like, I'll listen to it anyway because I don't really care. But yeah, I think in this the story works better if you go in not knowing anything and follow it through every twist and turn and reveal that it has. So yeah. Absolutely. But we will get into all that in a few minutes. First, we just wanted to quickly go through some of the news. Matt, Obi-Wan Kenobi. How do you feel about old Ben Kenobi?
Well, I love Ben Kenobi, the character played by Alec Guinness, and in the original Star Wars films, and that's the entire existence of Obi-Wan Kenobi that I'm aware of.
How would you feel if we got a spin-off solo Obi-Wan Kenobi origin story movie that tells what happens between those movies that don't exist that we don't talk about on this podcast and Episode 4?
I guess I would feel like that was a huge waste of money.
Yeah.
How would you feel?
I would feel the same. Because this is the news that after the solo Han Solo movie, the next Star Wars spin-off film is going to be an Obi-Wan Kenobi story. No word yet if Ewan McGregor is going to play the role again or not, but that's what we're getting. Yay!
Not surprised. I mean, we know we're getting a Han Solo movie.
Yeah.
I mean, we're gonna get a
Yoda movie.
Yeah, we're going to get a Salacious Crumb movie. I mean, it's down the line.
And this, like, on the one hand, I am of the opinion that you can find a good story in anything. You can do it. They made a Lego movie that had a wonderful story to it. So the choice of the setting and of the characters by itself is not enough to make it terrible on its own.
Of course, yes, and I agree with you completely. I don't know if I have any faith in their ability to do that, but I always have a mild bit of hope reserved just in case it turns out to be something like, I always reference Pirates of the Caribbean because nobody thought that was going to be good.
Yeah.
It turned out to be a classic. And it's like, yeah, that could really happen anywhere. I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy is another example where it's like, that looks terrible. That looks corny. And it was great. So yeah, it could happen. I just it really feels like a cynical, just exploitation of trying to print money, basically.
Yeah, and it's like, to me, it's more disappointing than anything, because like Disney bought LucasArts and we had this, we're bringing Star Wars back. We're going to have the main series Star Wars films, and then we're going to do these spin-off movies where we have chances of telling different kinds of movies that are not beholden to the rules of our main trilogy Star Wars films. And it just feels like we're just terrified to do anything with them. Like the galaxy of Star Wars is like ripe for storytelling, and we don't want to leave our small little bubble of characters. Like we have Rogue One, which I don't know if you ever even actually saw that.
No, still haven't.
Which is crazy because like I think you would say that the original Star Wars trilogy is pretty like huge in your development as a person who likes stories.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
For you to be so disinterested that you don't even want to see that movie yet, I think is very telling of where the series is at this point. And then we have the Han Solo movie, and now we have this, and it's just like there's so many stories you can tell. There's so much you can do, and I understand the money reasons, because you put Obi-Wan Kenobi's name on a poster and people know who that is and they go see the movie. But it just seems like the whole point was, you have the sure thing of the original like main series titles that are sure money grabbers. And then with these other things, you can take a risk. You can do these things that don't necessarily have to bring in big money, but we're just not going to do that anymore. We're just not going to do it.
I mean, didn't they even have Kasdan like write a script for the Han Solo movie, and it was like too dark and they rejected it or something? I'm probably
sure.
mashing together various details, but like I remember specifically Kasdan being like, they're trying to make Han Solo a comedic character, and he's not a comedic character. What he is a sarcastic character, and those are two very different things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole thing with Phil Lord and Chris Miller directing that movie, where they were a week away from being done with principal photography and got fired for Ron Howard. So that's crazy.
That's good news. Yeah, right.
So like, but that's the same thing happened with Rogue One, because they went into Rogue One and they wanted to make a tough, gritty Star Wars war movie. And then Disney got in and said, no, we can't do that. It has to be a movie that appeals to all the people that love all the Star Wars movies. And it's like this idea of these sidequels being a chance to tell different unique stories is just gone. So you're absolutely right. We're going to get this. We'll probably get a Leia origin story movie or something. And they'll probably like CGI Carrie Fisher's face in horribly. Like, it's just like, I am excited for episode 8 because I think Rian Johnson is an incredible director, incredible writer. And I think the last best hope for the Star Wars series becoming good again is him. But everything else in this universe, this franchise, I am just not interested in anymore.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, let's go to a universe that we are interested in, though, because Amazon's Galaxy Quest TV revival is back on track and has a new writer in Paul Scheer, who's a comedian he does the How Did This Get Made podcast. He was on the fantasy football game TV show that the name of I'm blanking on right now, which is The League. Yeah. He's a very funny comedian. I like him a lot, and he's a pretty good writer too. So I don't know if you had known the story of this show at all, Matt.
Not really.
So yeah, apparently it was in talks for a long time. Robert Gordon, the guy who wrote the original, was on track to write the series, and then Alan Rickman died, and that kind of threw everything off track. Alan Rickman died. It delayed the production as they were trying to figure out what they were going to do without him, if it was even worth doing something. And then Tim Allen wasn't available anymore, so it kind of threw everything else off again. But I guess with this announcement, we're back on track. We got a writer, and we're going forward. No indication of who's going to be in it, how much of the returning cast is going to be there or not. But Galaxy Quest is a wonderful film. It's one of the best Star Trek movies, which is crazy because it's like poking fun at those movies, but it captures what is so great about Star Trek in this kind of satire of it. So I am in on this. I want to see what they come up with.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I love Galaxy Quest. I don't know why they would even want to use the old cast. Like that seems like an odd choice to me. Like especially in this age where it's just so common to do remakes with a younger cast. It's like what I mean, and this isn't a remake. It's a revival. So I guess that's a separate thing. But still, I don't see why they would want to be beholden to the old cast. So
yeah, I mean, they could make cameo appearances or something, but their story kind of felt over. That they were these washed up actors who devoted their entire life to this thing, and then had to deal with it being real and the coolness that comes out of that. I don't know. I hope it does something well. I'm interested to see what they come up with, and I'm glad this exists. Unlike the Obi-Wan Kenobi spinoff, I'm glad that this looks like it's going to happen.
Yeah, they should call it Galaxy Quest: The Next Generation.
They should do that. That would be great. All right, the last thing I wanted to touch on very briefly, because I feel like I have to, as a person who rides hard for Buffy the Vampire Slayer as my favorite television series ever. There was some reports that came out this past weekend about Joss Whedon. It was an op-ed written by his ex-wife, basically saying he cheated on her throughout the 15 years of their marriage with many people in the industry. She declared him kind of a false feminist idol who holds out these feminist ideals while himself not really abiding by them in his personal life. This was pretty tough to read as a person who really likes Joss Whedon a lot. The thing I really want to say about this is most of this is their own personal business. It's something that happened between a man and his wife, and apparently many other women. But the point, like, there's all these stories about how, like, we knew Joss Whedon wasn't a feminist icon. Like, this proves that he was actually a scumbag all along, blah, blah, blah. That could be true. And Joss Whedon is a jerk for cheating on his wife. But to me, Whedon was never the icon. It was the characters he created that were the icons. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Buffy Summers in that show is a feminist icon. She represents feminism greatly, and loving that character as I did made me appreciate and respect women to a way that I don't think I would have had I not been as in love with that show as I was. So yes, this is sad news that he put his wife through this terrible, terrible stuff, but I don't think that means we suddenly have to stop appreciating the work that he did during his career.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like he's probably definitely a bit of a hypocrite, but at the same time, like the themes and the themes that are in almost all of his movies, it's not like that's fake. Like those are his actual opinions. I don't think you could write, art as convincing as that and have it be completely fake. So
and possibly even more importantly, even Buffy, a character that was created by him, is the result of hundreds of people's work, of tons of writers, directors, the cast, all these people coming together to create and mold the story and put up this character. So I would hate for there to be this sudden backlash against these shows that have meant so much to so many because of this one guy's really stupid mistakes and kind of dickishness that we didn't know about until now.
Yeah, I'm not really apologizing for him so much as it's more like don't we eventually learn that every big director is a piece of shit at some point? Like,
yeah, almost as if fame and wealth itself turns you into a piece of shit.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
So that's really all I wanted to say about that. I don't want to get into that more. I understand there's people that have very passionate opinions out there, and I'm not telling anyone that they're wrong, but I just will always love his work and the characters that he created. So that's all I wanted to say about that.
Okay.
All right. So let's move on to the main event. Let's talk about the Adventure Zone. And remember, everyone out there listening, this is going to be a no spoiler section. We will move to spoilers eventually, so Matt and I can get really geeky about the ending of this thing, which we loved so much. So, Matt, the Adventure Zone, do you want to take a hand at quickly summarizing what this podcast is?
Yeah, sure. That'll be a nice challenge. So on one level, it's the three McElroy brothers and their dad decide that they're going to do a Dungeons and Dragons podcast where The youngest brother, Griffin McElroy, is the dungeon master, and he creates the adventure. And frankly, the first couple 3-4 episodes, maybe they're kind of finding their legs. They're kind of figuring out what they're doing exactly. It's not like they planned this all out ahead of time, and it was all calculated. It was more like this grew into something, and they found something very special in the course of going forward into this D&D adventure. And fairly quickly, it really gels together as Griffin, the DM, comes up with his long-term plot and all of the various like sub arcs of what the adventure is going to be. And so it becomes really incredibly good due to a combination of his story and the characters that the other players, his two brothers and dad, come up with, and the choices they make, the way they play their characters, the way the way their choices interact with Griffin's story and cause kind of unexpected things to happen. And then there's this extra level of like just hilarity in the fact that they're all really funny people, and they're that's the kind of thing that's kind of ineffable and hard to describe, because it's hard to just like tell someone something is funny. But like I just like bust up laughing just uncontrollably almost every single episode, if not multiple times per episode, for this the entire run of this podcast. So that wasn't really a summary. That was more kind of sketching out what this is, because I don't think summary works.
No, I would not want. No, we don't need to summarize the plot or anything. I think that was great. I think. Yeah, the crazy thing about this is it started on kind of a whim, because the three brothers run their own podcast called My Brother, and Me, an advice show for the modern era, which is basically just them reading questions that people send in and improving hilarity. And it's great. It's funny. They decided one day they were going to do Dungeons and Dragons on a lark, and that first episode got so much of a positive response that they decided to spin it off and roll it into this whole thing. So you're absolutely right that this kind of started very roughly and without any kind of plan and gelled into this thing that, and the hardest part of trying to convince people to give this a shot is if those people have never played Dungeons and Dragons before, because like D&D on its own is this unique animal that has an ability to tell stories in a different way from any other kind of way that you have experienced stories before. Because like you said, you have a dungeon master who's in charge of the world, in charge of telling you what happens to you, and you get to react. So it's this like kind of like group storytelling where one person's in charge, but each person has their own agency at the same time. And this weird combination of improvisation and planned storytelling and random luck to dictate the things that are happening. And it's totally unique on its own. And then you mix this into a radio show type of thing, which is as far as I'm concerned, kind of unheard of. Like nothing like this has ever existed before. And now, they've been doing this for almost 3 years now. So the following is huge and everyone's doing Dungeons and Dragons podcasts now. But this on its own, this way of doing things is truly unique, I think.
Yeah, I agree. It's truly a collaborative storytelling art form. And there's like one specific thing that they do that makes me think that like one or more of them must have some kind of background in theater, and specifically like improv, because there's this thing that they almost always do where even if someone says they do something, if one of the players, one of the brothers, for example, makes kind of a goofy choice that is kind of self-consciously supposed to be funny, nobody is ever like, no, that's stupid. That doesn't happen. What happens is everyone rolls with it, and no matter how silly it was, it ends up integrating into the story, and very often somehow, like in a completely shocking way, turns out to be like your favorite thing about the story suddenly, or just like a really genius thing where you're like, that's so in it, that silly goof that they made that was just kind of a one-off joke is now integrated into the story, and the story almost couldn't do without it now. Like, again, that's one of those things where it's like explaining that is like, that doesn't sound like that would work.
But it does. And I think that has to do, like, this is almost like a show format that was made for them, because if you listen to My Brother and Me on its own, that's kind of how that show excels too, is that one of them goes off on a random tangent. They grab something from what they're talking about and just go with it. And like the other two, like, go there with them and are there with them the whole time and are pushing them on, or like helping escalate the joke or the scenario or whatever to a much more ridiculous place, all the while like laughing uncontrollably. And I think you take that and you put it in this fantasy world with a story behind it, and you're right, it turns into something else. And I love the story of like the three of them, the three characters, are in the world called Trace Horny Boys. And that's literally because the Merle character, who's played by the brother's father, told that to his children characters in the story, just blurted it out without even realizing it, that he was talking to his children, and that just became what they're referred to as. And if you look through the wiki for this thing, like, that is the name of the team. That is how you differentiate, because now that this is wrapped up, they're going to move on to a different campaign. They're going to tell different stories, but this will be the story of Trace Horny Boys. And it's just so ridiculous and so hilarious. And I think that leads me into one of the big things I wanted to talk about with this, on top of everything we've already said, Matt, which is audience interaction, and how that takes this thing that's already unique and elevates it further, because you have this this went on for so long, this one arc. They play every other week for like 2 hours is about what the episode length is, and their final episode was episode 69. So if that tells you how long, also that's nice. Anyway, but they went on for a very long time. So us listening, and you and I caught on the tail end. I wish I had been there from the beginning, but people listening like began to know these people and were interacting, and so they were feeding off of comments from people and what people liked and what they didn't like. I mean, the idea of the fantasy Costco was an idea that a listener had that they just ran with and became part of the world. And now, after every big adventure, our heroes go back to fantasy Costco, where they buy stuff from a crazy vendor who is absolutely hilarious. And that just became part of the world. So like these inside jokes, these jokes between the three of them, and between the three of them and us, the listener, like spread into this sprawling, like all important to the story thing. And it makes you, the listener, feel like this is not just their story. This is not just a story that you're listening to, that you are part of that story, that you belong there as well, that you are going on this journey with these guys. And that is so important to the emotional core of what's happening, because I think one of the big things you wanted to talk about is the heart at the center of this thing. And it's this goofy, funny podcast in a fantasy world where people are playing this nerdy game, but it is also one of the most emotional experiences of my life. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I have a tweet draft somewhere that was like, there are two podcasts that have made me cry. One of them is the Jocko episode about a horrible massacre, and the other one is the Adventure Zone episode like 57 or something. And then I think I changed. And then later, like more than one episode affected me that much, so I was like, okay, I can't even say that anymore, because it's like basically just the whole show, because it's amazing. Like I've actually learned a lot about storytelling and drama from this, because it just kind of communicates to you that if you feel connected to the characters, and they really do that really well, then you can really pull at the heartstrings really effectively. I don't want to move away from talking about the heart aspect, the emotional aspect. I did want to mention that this wouldn't really work if it weren't for the fact that Griffin, the DM, is exceptional at doing a large number of voices and slipping between characters really, really deftly, to the point where it's you almost can't believe it. Like that he'll be doing 2 or 3 characters in a scene that are all interacting with with the actual player characters. And not only is he doing the voices in such a way where your brain is fooled and you're kind of imagining the scene perfectly, because I don't know, like that's just how it works. Like if you hear the voices, you're imagining the characters being there. But also he's making the correct like character decisions for several different characters at the same time, in real time. Like it's like writing, except it's real time. Like he's off the top of his head.
He has notes and he has plans, but like anyone who's ever played D&D knows, the second you leave things up to the player, that all goes off the rails and you're just on your own and you have to make this stuff up as you go. And you're absolutely right. The voices he does are incredible. I mean, I don't hear Griffin doing Angus the boy detective. I hear Angus. Like that's just Angus. Yeah, that's just Angus. And he feels like a real person. He feels like a real character. So, and I think that ties into the emotionality that this isn't, that it can be funny and there can be meta jokes as well, because they do break character all the time and they joke about things happening like out of character, which if anyone's played D&D knows you do that too. You do that all the time, but they are also, Griffin, with every single one of the 50 some characters he has to play, is so committed to them. But the three of them are also so committed to their characters as well. Like there's a tendency in D&D to not really role play with it very much. And you just kind of do the things that you, the person, would do. But you can tell that these guys specifically set out to create a character and then act according to that character. Taco is an asshole, and Justin McElroy is not an asshole, but he is fully committed to this guy being like the asshole with the heart of gold underneath it all, but still always going to do the selfish thing, always going to protect him and his own in front of other people. Magnus is always going to be that guy that rushes in. That's like I think he said at the beginning that Magnus rushes in is like the call sign of his character. So he's always going to do that. And they're just so committed to that. Yeah. And like it wouldn't work without that. And I think it wouldn't work without that is going to be something that you and I were probably going to say like 6 more times over the course of this podcast, because I think there are so many elements going on here at the same time, and take one of them away and the story loses a lot. So like the fact that this came together the way it did is nothing short of like a miracle, I think. Yeah.
So this may be a little awkward to talk about without going into spoilers, but just kind of structurally speaking, one thing that amazed me about this is that once they get through the first kind of adventure, which was not really planned out to be part of the main storyline, because we already described kind of the reasons why that was.
And they started off of like one of those like books.
They immediately move into a series of like discrete adventures, and each of those adventures is almost like a different genre. It's like its own book. It's its own type of story. It's the same characters, obviously. It's all the same through line, but each of these kind of sub arcs are so strikingly different and so successful at what they're trying to do as storytelling exercises that I was like, but by the third one in, I was like, well, surely the next one can't be as good as these three have been. Like you can't bat that high an average, or however that works. I don't know anything about baseball. It was kind of unbelievable to me that it managed to pivot. I don't want to say a pivot in terms of tone, because tone isn't really the right thing. It's more just like the whole feel of it, the whole genre approach that it was going for, like the things it was, what it was trying to be at the time kept changing, and it was successful.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the second arc, I think they call them arcs in this, which is a word that we're very used to because we got Worm. But the second arc is basically a Murder on the Orient Express type story where they're on a train, someone gets killed, and they have to investigate. And it is hilarious because you're taking these characters, and that's what I think works so much about it, is you're taking these characters and plopping them into these different genres, and seeing them kind of push up against the wall of the genre, but still playing within the rules to a certain extent. Yeah,
that's true, because there's obviously like trope awareness on the part of the players where they'll be like, oh, I get it. We're in a Murder on the Orient Express type story, but they still have to play their characters in such a way that they're not just like bulldozing through kind of the invisible guidelines that the DM has erected, because that would just be the boring way of playing D&D, which is kind of what we talked about. Like you can play it like it's a board game and just ignore the character aspect, but that's missing like at least half of the fun that you can have.
Oh yeah. And actually, I mean, to be honest with you, I think D&D combat in general is fairly boring. I mean, when you break the game down to its simplest elements, it's rolling dice and checking numbers, and that's it. So without the character behind it, without the emotion behind it, without the concern for, are we going to succeed? Are we going to win in this moment? It doesn't work. So I think when you break D&D down, and I know people that play it metagaming, like where they're just trying to win, they're not trying to enjoy or envelop themselves with the experience, I think it ruins it. And I think obviously this show is set out to entertain more than it is have a group of people play D&D. So one of the things they realized very quickly is they need to play pretty fast and loose with the rules. They follow them. They generally follow 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, but they don't pay attention to all the little minute details. Like the rules in the game get very complicated. And I think if you're trying to tell a story to an audience, needlessly so. So it was very clever of them to say, we're not going to worry about resting. We're not really going to worry about spell slots. They don't really track that at all. I'm pretty sure characters cast spells they don't even have at some point, but it just, if it is like a fuck yeah moment, like Griffin doesn't care. He's like, yeah, let's go down this rabbit hole. Let's chase this excitement and see where it goes. And if it doesn't quite line up with the rules, I don't care.
Yeah, right. It's a framework for telling the story, and where the framework gets in the way of telling a good story, they're all kind of on the same page that the story comes first.
Right.
That said, I don't feel like they have to. I don't feel like they intentionally break the rules very often, if ever. I think usually it's more like they'll do something and then maybe afterward realize like, oh, you were out of spell slots actually, so that shouldn't have worked. But it's not like they're going to rewind and say, oh, that didn't actually happen. Yeah. That's anathema to the whole thing they're doing. Like I said, it's always yes and not no, we're not going to allow that.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people that suspect that they fib their rules a little bit, or their rolls. I mean, that when Magnus rolls another 19, that he didn't really roll a 19. He's just saying he did. But I don't know. I think it's more funny if things go wrong sometimes. Like it's more entertaining if things don't always go right. So I don't think they're actually doing that. But like, I don't know. It's just, it's like their approach to the game is so simplistic and wonderful without like bogging down to that stuff that like even if they are intentionally breaking the rules at some point, I don't care. It's not important to me. I care more about Taco and Merle and Magnus than I care about did you really get a critical hit on that roll? Yeah,
totally. And like I think I just like to talk about this aspect of D&D that like it's useful and good whether you roll well or roll poorly, because like that's kind of like the drama of watching sports or something where you know you vicariously want the numbers to be high because you want them to succeed, but also it's more dramatic if you roll a critical failure and everyone is in a much more dire situation. So like it's an interesting lesson about how drama works, because you can take a situation and you could make it interesting with a really good roll or a really bad roll. It's just interesting in two different directions.
Yeah. And I think Griffin recognizes that. And when people screw up, Like he lets them screw up. I think they set a internal rule, and I don't think they ever actually stated this, but I think they decided that none of the characters were ever going to die. He was not going to actually let them die, or if they did actually die, he would come up with a story reason for them to not just be true. Your character's dead. Sorry, you lose the game. But he's not afraid to fuck them over when they screw up, when they do something they shouldn't have, when they act stupidly. And I think that's really important for the story to work. Because you're right, if it's just people winning constantly, then it gets boring. And if it's just things going perfectly constantly, then it gets boring. And I think like that relates. Like one of the things that I kind of wanted to touch on was the fact that this encouraged you and I and our group of friends to start playing D&D again, which I hadn't done since college. I don't know if you had.
No.
But so we started again, and Michael, who frequents this podcast, is DMing for us and creating this wonderful world for us. It's really great. I love it a lot. But there was the last time we played, one of our characters had this wonderful plan that they did on their own, and it was great and was going to work. Of course, they didn't tell any of us, and you inadvertently like totally screwed up the plan, not knowing that that's what you were doing. But that moment was better than it would have been if everything had worked perfectly.
Yeah, that's like the gift of the Adventure Zone. Because when I was in college, we played together in college, and like I had the attitude of basically wanting to win and not really having I don't even want to say I didn't have the confidence to role play. It was more like I didn't even know what that would look like.
Yeah.
Like I didn't have an archetype or a prototype or whatever in my head of like, what would a D&D session with like really good role playing on the part of all the characters look like? You would try to role play. And like I always enjoyed that. I mean, and you would do well. Like I didn't like feel like I could do it. But like now that I've listened to the Adventure Zone, I get it. And so now I'm like, okay, I get it. Like this is the fun part. Actually, I don't care about the roles. I care about trying to like create this character and then have my choices reflect the character's motivations. And like it's like an acting challenge and a writing challenge, really kind of first and foremost, I think.
Absolutely. And your character is, if I may say, wonderful.
Thank you.
I wish, like, we are recording these. I don't know if anyone else out there that's listening would ever want to hear our D&D sessions. We're recording them all because we all have to be on Skype because we all live in different states. But so they exist somewhere on a hard drive. So if you guys ever want to hear it, we could edit them together and maybe release them. But Matt's character on this thing is the best.
Well, thank you. Yeah, let us know if there's an interest in that.
Yeah, certainly if there's enough of interest. It will never be the production quality of the Adventure Zone. Griffin writes music. He mixes all this stuff together. There's sound effects. It's so well produced, which is something we haven't actually talked about yet, which I think is something you wanted to get into with why this works specifically as an audio medium.
Yeah. No, so like the music, for one thing, that was one thing that really hit me because just more toward the latter half, he starts really putting in a lot more music. I think he just kind of realized that he could do it, and then he gets really good at it and it gets really effective. And it emphasizes the dramatic beats always in a very understated but perfectly effective way. And like, that's probably, if there's any parts of this podcast that make people cry, I guarantee you those are the parts that are set to music. Because music just does that. Like it takes whatever's going on and amplifies it, and it taps into your brain. And listening to that, I was like, there's this other project that we're working on, me and Scott and Michael, and I was like, oh, well, that obviously has to have music. Like I didn't realize it until listening to the Adventure Zone, but now I realize that has to have music in it to some degree, because it's just you're missing out on the opportunity of the audio format without music.
I think there's another D&D game that I've listened to before. It's called Harmon Quest. It's part of Dan Harmon's Harmontown podcast, which is a comedy podcast he does every week. They made basically an animated kind of cartoon based off of their audio recordings of them playing D&D. And it's very funny, it's very good, but it's not the same. And it's not the same for many reasons. One of them, I think, is just this works with audio more than it could work in any other medium. Like we're in this weird state right now where podcasts as a medium are exploding because so many people are on the move now, and it's just entertainment that's always with you. So people are just listening to podcasts more than they ever have before. Like it's this rebirth of radio as a medium for entertainment, for storytelling, for all these different things. And this is like a study in the best way to use that medium, because there's so much of D&D that requires imagination. And it's four guys sitting around a table rolling dice. So it all is people imagining stuff. And because it's audio, because you're basically in their same position where you're having to sit there imagining it, like it becomes alive in your imagination as it is for them. And the better that Griffin does to explain things, the better it works visually in your head. And I just think something will be lost in that if you're just seeing it thrown on the screen, what they're saying, rather than you're processing in your head and you're imagining how this would look and you're laying the scene and executing how it all looks in your head. And they're just like, I just don't think this would work any other way.
Yeah. So one really, really cool thing, and I agree completely with all of that. And I think that's one of the main assets that they have working for them. The fan community has turned out huge quantities of fan art, and that's one way in which people can feel involved in the show. And it's like, and we've actually seen this in the Worm community too, where people will make fan art and there'll be a wide variety of different takes on a certain character, because all you really have to work on is a description. There's no canonical image. There's no canonical, like, this is the official picture of what Magnus looks like. Whereas like there's the Batman looks a certain way. Like you're not making Batman fan art. If you draw Batman, you're just drawing Batman. But like if you're doing the Adventure Zone fan art, you are collaborating in the creation of what this character is being, it looks like and looks like in the eyes of other listeners in some sense. So it's truly like that's one of the more powerful forms of audience participation that I've seen when I kind of poke around the community.
Yeah. And again, to the brothers' credit, they've intentionally fostered that. Like if you listen to interviews with them, they intentionally have been very vague and general when describing what the characters look like, because they want you to come up with what you think it is. They want you to take their character attributes and the voices they do for them and all these stuff and construct what you think they would look like from that. They fostered that very specifically. And that ties into this kind of group storytelling, that this belongs not just to the McElroy brothers, but it belongs to everyone that's been part of the journey. And that, I think, not only does that make it for me feel more real and be more emotional, but it is just this type of storytelling that just doesn't exist anywhere else.
Yeah. I'm kind of out of non-spoiler things to talk about.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I think I am too. And the only thing I will say before we go to the spoiler section, for those of you that are listening that have never listened to this thing, if we haven't done a good enough job of giving it at least like giving it a try, just at least just like sitting down with an episode and trying it out, I don't know what else to do other than to say like, just to beg you to give it a shot, because you are entering and experiencing a thing that is like nothing you've ever experienced before. And I think you're a testament to that, Matt, because I basically was yelling at you to try this thing for a week or two before you finally got around to doing it. And you caught up remarkably fast.
Oh yeah. I plowed through it because it was great. And I'm really glad that I made it without any spoilers. And I mean, just as like the very final sales pitch to just turn off the podcast and go check it out is, there's a reveal at the end that, and I'm not alone in saying this. In fact, I'm not the first person to say this. It was a film critic that Scott and I said it was like the best the best story reveal in, what did he say, 10 years? Yeah. Period. Like in any movie, in any book. And I think that there's actually like as absurd as that sounds, there's actually a case for that. That's how effective, and like you will just be a combination of like laughing and like in awe that this worked, and if you just go ahead and listen to the next part of this podcast, then that's just gonna be spoiled for you. So
yeah. All right. So this is our official warning. We are moving into spoilers. If you have not listened to the Adventure Zone or have not finished the Adventure Zone, we are going to spoil. Everything's on the table. So we're going to talk about it all. So if you still have one episode left, if you're still halfway there, don't listen to this. Please come back and listen to this after you've finished. It feels weird to tell people not to listen to something when our whole point is that we want people to listen to this, but
I know. Yeah, but this is actually important to us.
Yeah, like I hope we're getting across the passion we have with this thing, because it is absolutely important to us. So spoilers. Okay, spoilers have started. Matt, Berry Blue Jeans.
Yeah,
Berry Blue Jeans. The thing with that is, after that reveal, I went back and I listened to the first few episodes. Where Berry Blue Jeans was literally a throwaway, hilariously named character where one of the brothers just like tossed out a funny name, the first name that came to their head. And then just like you said, they yes-anded it and just went with it. And of course, this stupid named funny character becomes the key to like everything in the story. And it's in such a natural, organic way.
Yeah. And it makes sense. And also like, by the time you find out that that's who that is, you've actually gotten to know that character a lot better as the Red Robe.
Yeah.
And there's so many there's so many tiny moments of, I mean, I don't even know how to like approach it in a discussion, but like you're encouraged to trust the director. But also she seems very aloof and cold, but not in a way that's like necessarily highly suspicious. You're just like, okay, well, something is going on with her. Yeah. And she's telling you not to trust the Red Robe. And the Red Robe seems kind of deranged and creepy and aggressive. But then he starts doing weird things that are helpful. And now you don't know who to trust. And then you get these moments where like it was, for some reason, like even though you don't understand what's happening yet, there's the moment where the Red Robe realizes that they found the dead Red Robe outside of the vault, and he like freaks out, and it's like the voice acting from Griffin conveys everything you need to know.
Yeah,
where he's like, "You found her," and you're like, okay, so this, like, I actually care about this mysterious Red Robe character from the like handful of lines. It's really cool how it works.
No, you're absolutely right. And the cool thing of that is like how clever it, like Griffin had to have gone through and just listened to these tiny beats, because Taco finds the Umbra staff next to this body of this Red Robe. And there's just no doubt in my mind that he did not plan for that to be Taco's twin Loop. Yeah. That got trapped in an Umbra staff at the beginning, and then it's like there's no, like, obviously some part along the way you realize that he's plotted out this whole story, but at that early point there's just no way that was planned. So his ability to take these small, seemingly insignificant moments and tie them into a major story is so great. And you see people try to do this in stories a lot, especially in film. When you're telling a prequel, or when you're trying to do a sequel to a movie, the biggest one is when you're trying to do a sequel to a movie that never had there be a sequel planned. Like, I think Pirates of the Caribbean, it's ironic that we mentioned this again on the same podcast, but it is a perfect example of that, where the first movie had all this like lore and interesting stuff in it, and then the second movie, like, suddenly we need to tell a story. So they took seemingly insignificant things from that first movie and then developed a whole plot around them. And I think Griffin does that better than a lot of Hollywood writers do. And it's amazing. And the payoff is so great. Like, the thing that works about the Berry Blue Jeans moment is like, he's so good at anticipating the moment that people are going to realize what's going on. So like, it's like, I'm not going to have any clothes, so hand me that when I come out. And then it's just like, and then a crisp pair of denim jeans. Yeah. And you're just like, you can hear because I think the coolest part about this that we didn't talk in the non-spoiler section is that the three guys playing the characters don't know the story either. Right. So not only are we getting to experience stuff, but we're getting to experience them experiencing it. And because they're so involved and so into this, they get legitimately excited. And that just builds it more. Like the Barry Blue Jeans moment, they lost their shit. And that just makes you lose your shit more because you're along with them.
Yeah, you feel like you're participating in this adventure with these guys.
Right.
Way more so than any other form of storytelling. Even though this is obviously recorded and you're listening to it after the fact, you feel like you're in the struggle with them. And I've never quite experienced it to that degree before.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's something to say about every one of these arcs. I don't know if we're going to have even time.
Which is your favorite? I guess we can do.
Well, so, okay. Rather than talk about my favorite, first I wanted to talk about the Suffering Game. Not because it's my favorite, but because it really kind of stretched and like taught me things about what you can do with what you can do with story. Because basically the Suffering Game is you're taking these characters who you love at this point and you're just beating the hell out of them.
Yeah.
And you're like permanently taking things away from them. And like even at the time I was thinking like, this is D&D, they could just like magically reverse that, but I was like, I don't think they will, because I think Griffin at least understands that like this really only will have this effect if this is a permanent loss that this character is suffering, and they're sacrificing and what's funny is like on another level you realize these are D&D characters being played by these guys. These are like the artifice of it is completely obvious, even more so than some other book where obviously a book is also artifice, but this is more obviously artifice, and yet you still feel for them, and it still sucks. You're like, and like it even sucks because like you'll hear the dad be like, like he'll like heave a sigh of like he really isn't enjoying the fact that his character just lost an eye or whatever.
Yeah. That's the craziest part, is because they don't try to mask that artifice. It's like they break from character constantly. Mm-hmm. So there's never a moment where you actually think like that this is real, except it all feels real. Like, and I think you're absolutely right that it ties into the fact that they are so into it as well, that they are so involved as well, that they don't want to see that bad things happen to their characters. I think my example of that is in the 11th Hour arc. One of my favorite moments from the story is when Griffin sets up, they get to the chalice, and basically they've won, and the chalice is like, okay, I will let you win, but you have to let me give you an offer first. And in any video game I've ever played, like, there's no temptation there. Like, the thing that is bad, the thing that the chalice wants you to do is so clearly the wrong thing to do in the situation that when you're just, like, inhabiting the body of a character in a game, it's really easy to not do that. It's really easy to just say, no, obviously that's going to make me lose the game. So no, I'm not going to do that. So it's very easy to make choices like that just like fall flat in moments like this, because if you metagame, and obviously you're going to say no, but they're so into their characters that of course they have to end up saying no, like, or else the story won't continue. But the way each of them finds a way to both be tempted by the offer of the thing through their character, but find a in-character reason why they would say no. Like, it's not enough for them just to say no. Like, for Taco specifically, there's a huge temptation to say yes. And he has to reason within the mind of his character, not the mind of his player, why I am going to refuse this very tempting offer. And that to me is just incredible on a level I've never seen in a game like this before.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of it being like a credible offer, I think Griffin in the Adventure Zone said that he actually thought that Magnus might take the offer, and so he basically had a plan of like how to take the story and how to deal with that. So it wouldn't have just been like, it wasn't a fake choice. It was a real choice.
Yeah. Man, so Magnus, I think, is my favorite character. And Magnus is where I cried at the end of the final one, because Magnus dying and getting to see his wife, and the final moment of Magnus rushes in, like literally just ripped my heart out and destroyed me. Like, but it's like, I'm sitting at work. Like, I was literally sitting in my cube at work, like brushing tears out of my eyes of this fake D&D character played by this improv guy in a podcast, because he's getting to finally be with his wife. And in this moment, like, you realize how ridiculous that sounds, but it doesn't matter. It's just, it feels real.
Yeah, it works just as well as anything, if not better, for a variety of reasons. Yeah, I think I was at the gym. I don't think I was at the gym, like exercising, and like between sets, like having to like blink, you know, like that's how. Yeah, it was completely affecting, and that's only one of many moments that affected me like that.
And that's like, we've talked on this podcast so many times about how often you have these great stories that establish everything so well and then just flub the landing like so hard that just can't stick it. And it kind of taints the entire experience, because the landing is your central conceit. It's what everything is about. And I gotta say, man, the landing, the ending of this thing was everything it needed to be. Like, the way it was contrived, like that, how Griffin very clearly set out to make a Final Fantasy-esque boss, was so wonderful. But then he also brought in this simple idea to allow like people from your past to come in and help in the end. Was just this wonderful moment of culmination of everything, because this world was so big and had so many different characters that they've interacted along the way, and he found a way to bring that all together into this moment, and it just, in a natural like way, that it doesn't feel contrived, doesn't feel forced, doesn't feel like, I don't know, like Game of Thrones does.
Yeah, he actually not only on a story level, but he even had like a game mechanic where when they had been going through the Stolen Century, they had been earning these like bond units, and you're like, okay, I don't know I don't know how that's going to matter.
Yeah.
But they're earning these units of some form of esoteric, currency or power. And Griffin tells them it's going to matter a lot later. That's like all he said. He's like, it's actually going to matter later. And then that's what they have to spend to summon their like, their mentors from the past or whatever. And so it would be fine if it was just a story thing. It would have been fine if there wasn't even that game mechanic aspect. But the fact that there's a game mechanic aspect and you realize that this was clearly like integrated into everything, it makes you appreciate it even more, I think.
Yeah. And I think that to carry it on, the epilogue of they've all won, and now and the idea that Griffin has an idea of what he wants to do, but one of the first things he says to people is, what has happened to you in the last year? What has happened to you since the end? And again, goes to show, like, the story is his, but the characters are theirs. And they have almost as much of a say in what goes on as he does. And they pick what they want their characters to do. And Merle was never my favorite character out of the three. He was usually the most funny because of him inadvertently doing things. But the way that his dad, like, came up with this perfect end of this character who, like, abandoned his children and then decided in the end to, like, teach the next generation of adventurers. It's just this, like, God, it's so amazing. And it was improv. That, like, they didn't know that Griffin was going to give them that option. That's just something that he felt deep down was the culmination of everything he was doing with that character at that point. And so we did it. And it's just this real moment that just makes you so happy, like, so happy. I'm getting choked up, like, talking about it.
Yeah. I'm wondering, like, I mean, so am I, and I'm thinking about, how like maybe one of the reasons why this is so effective as the audio thing is like you can clearly hear Magnus. Is that Travis? I really should keep that straight, but you can clearly hear that Travis is choked up and like,
he's literally crying. Like as he's reading his lines, quote unquote, as a character, he is crying.
Yeah. And like that's an authentic emotion. That's not acting at all. That's a person who's so into this story that they're feeling that, and you're empathizing with not only with Magnus but with Travis. And that's really unique.
Yeah, because this was his character for 3 years. This was his baby. He cultivated this thing. He made it, and he was there with it, and in it through every trial, every tribulation, every growth, every temptation to get back to his wife that died. And oh man, it's I think we've done about as good of a job of explaining why it works as we can, because there's just this like almost undescribable it factor to it on top of everything we've said, that just like we could lay out every single piece, but the summation of this is always going to be greater than those individual parts, because it comes together and just creates this thing that like is near indescribable, he says after talking about it for an hour. But like I'm struggling for words right now because I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's been really fun to talk about because there were some things that I had kind of thought through ahead of time and been like, I want to talk about this aspect of like why I think this works. And then in the course of this discussion, there have been other things where I've been like, oh, I didn't think of this before, but here's another reason why this works in this way. But you could almost go through every episode and find like the notes, the exact notes that were struck that propagated forward to the next episode that led to such and such happening. And I mean, but there's almost no point in doing that, because like you say, it's like the reason that's able to happen is because of the people who are involved and largely Griffin's kind of guiding hand. But obviously like it doesn't work without all of them. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think if you didn't have anything else you wanted to touch on, I think that'll be it for us on the Adventure Zone. I just to emphasize that Angus MacDonald is the best character in literature. Angus is so amazing. Angus's arc from this little like the butt of jokes to like the fact that he becomes the star pupil of this new magic school at the end is so fulfilling. It's just so great. There's such an asshole to him throughout the whole thing too, and he just never goes away. I mean, like we could go on for another hour probably about each individual character and what they're good about. And like, I mean, Taco literally is dating death, is in a homosexual relationship with death by the end of the thing. And that is something that sounds so ridiculous out of context, but in context, you're just like, yeah, that sounds exactly like what Taco would do. Yeah. That's the exact type of person he'd be attracted to. Literal death. There's also like, I know we just said we were done, but like the character of Loop, who's sort of like, this is going to sound wrong, but she's sort of barely a character. And yet I love that character. Like in terms of actually being a character, she's almost not in the thing at all. Yeah. She gets very few like lines. But you get to understand her through her choices and through how important she is to everyone else. And it just another example where I'm like, I have learned yet another thing about storytelling by seeing how you could make me feel so much about this character who really very little energy and time was, or plenty of energy, but very little time was spent on. I think you're absolutely right. Yeah. Man. Okay. So I think we're going to have to force ourselves to wrap it up here. Yeah. Okay. Or else we're just going to keep going. But that's the Adventure Zone. I can't stress enough. If you were waiting until the end of spoilers and now you're back with us,
subscribe to this podcast, listen to it all, enjoy every minute of it because it is unique. It is heartwarming. It is hilarious. It is everything you want in a story. It is everything that storytelling is supposed to do. It is why I love stories and why I love narrative and why I love this medium of entertainment. That's the Adventure Zone, and it's great. And it was like so amazing to be on that ride.
Yep, I agree.
All right. So before we take off for the week, then, why don't we talk really quick about what we've been watching? Do you have anything, Matt? I know we've been doing so many projects here at the Daily Planet that there's very little time for other stuff.
No. There was a web piece of like web metafiction called 17776. Did you hear about that at all? Did I tell you about this?
No.
Yeah, so it's hard. It's one of these things that's kind of hard to describe. It's not quite a webcomic. It's more like people refer to things like this as metafiction, but it's like a serialized story. You can almost just view it as a serial, but it's not really a narrative. It's just a dialogue between these. The less kind of said, the better. It's just supposed to be like 10,000 years in the future, and it's about what the game of football has evolved into in 10,000 years. Which sounds like nonsense, but it's actually more like 15,000 years because the year is 17776. And just like, it's what it really is a meditation on what happens to people and to the world when all of their like, serious concerns have been removed, and they just get to live with basically frivolity for like an arbitrarily long amount of time, and the world becomes really strange. So it's science fiction, and that's my bag. So I like it. It's not that long. It's neither is it terribly short. It'd probably take a couple hours to page through the whole thing.
Cool.
I loved it actually.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
I will definitely check that out. And you listening out there, you should too. I want to talk about The Defenders, which is the newest Netflix Marvel series that came out on Friday. It's 8 episodes long. I watched them all already. Matt, I'm pretty mixed on the Netflix Marvel things in general. I wrote a very scathing review of Iron Fist, which is not a good show at all. And this is not very good either. It manages to capture the best of Daredevil and the best of Jessica Jones and the slightly okay of Luke Cage, but it has this Danny Rand shaped anchor on it of the Iron Fist, which is just weighing down everything. He's just this piece of shit wet blanket of a character that like, and the show almost realizes that and tries to like maneuver the story around that to avoid having to deal with his annoyingness as much as possible. But it's just like, it makes it to where it's just 3/4 of a good show, which is a fairly good percentage, but just kind of a disappointment. It's still, even at like, all these Netflix shows have been 13 episodes up until this point. This is the first that's 8, and it's still too long. This is called The Defenders, and our characters don't even meet each other until deep into the second hour. They don't even fight each other until they're alongside each other until 4 hours into the thing. And it's just like, we've lost the idea of story economy when we've just said that television shows can just be 8 to 13 hour movies now. And we don't have to follow any kind of normal structure anymore. And the Marvel Netflix things are the biggest example of why that's bad.
Yeah, I haven't watched any of these.
Good.
But that makes a lot of sense. It seems like a bad use of the ability to make arbitrarily long TV series out of things that probably don't need that much screen time.
I want TV to re-embrace the episode. You can tell a contained story in a single episode that still ties into a greater episode. You don't have to just make it like we stop this at an hour because that's how long episodes are, but it's really just a random stopping point in a continuing story. It's not its own self-contained thing. And I want to see episodes make a comeback because I think they work, and there's a reason why we did them for so long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know what you mean. I've been watching a lot of Power Rangers, and I've really come to appreciate the episodic structure of those shows.
Oh, you mean how the last 10 minutes of that are the same every single time?
Yeah. Well, did you know there's like 6 or more like Power Rangers is now?
Really?
There's like a samurai one. There's like a Chinese martial arts themed one. There's a dinosaur themed one. There's a classic one that we were familiar with. And they're all Power Rangers. Like it's literally Power Rangers, but they're different themes and they have different sets of kids who are the Rangers. Oh yeah, there's one that's like outer space, like science fiction.
Jesus. But
they all have the same formula, obviously. They work on my kids really, really well. It's kind of interesting to watch how they've like honed this formula.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all I had. So I think that wraps up our episode for the week. You can check back here next Monday because we're going to do a new episode where you, me, and our resident Song of Ice and Fire expert, James Gentry, will be talking about Season 7 of Game of Thrones. The finale is next weekend, so we're going to do a Season 7 recap and discussion. So let's be honest here, Matt. This is going to be 3 dudes shitting all over this TV show for like an hour because none of us really like it anymore. So if that sounds appealing to you for some reason, come back next week. I will say that's mostly joking. I mean, there are things I think we're going to be very critical of, but I still think if you exclude the writing, this is some of the best made television that exists. Nothing has ever been this big on TV.
Yeah. My one comment about like yesterday's episode was like, I liked everything except the stupid stuff. And that's kind of my feeling about this whole season is I'll actually enjoy a lot of the episode and then I'll just like, oh, why did you do that? Come on.
That's how I feel too. That's the first 20 minutes of last night's episode was so good that I was like, I was pumped again. I was like, yes, we're doing this. And then of course it makes decisions that just so boneheaded. Yeah. Anyway, we'll get into all that next week right here on the Daily Planet.
That's right. And if you like what we do here at the Daily Planet, consider supporting us on Patreon. You can donate $1 a month or whatever else you can afford to ensure we keep making great content at patreon.com/dailyplanetfilms.
Yeah, and if you listen on iTunes, consider giving us a rating and a review on there. Well, it really does help our exposure. Another thing we have this week is the return of the Kryptonian collection. So you'll hear me, Matt, Michael, and guest Daniel argue if 12 Monkeys is good enough to join the ranks of the best movies our planet has to offer. All right, so that's all we have this week. Matt, where can you be found on the internet for those that want to do that?
I am a Twitterer at moredenamail, and I am fairly prolific on the We've Got Worm podcast.
So prolific. I am also on Twitter at ScottDaily85. You can find the Twitter for this podcast at Daily Planet Films, and our other one is at Got Worm Pod. That's our We've Got Worm podcast. It's really great. You should check it out. And that's all we have. We will see you all next week.
Podcast is over. It's done. We hope you all had some fun. Go back to your work or your school. Maybe the gym. Hey, that's cool. Regardless, just go away. But please come back next Friday. There'll be